The Metaphysics of an Atheist Chaplain, How Secularism Deals with the Dying. So, Wes Fornes has a bachelor's degree in biblical studies and philosophy from Dallas Baptist University, Masters of Philosophical Theology from Criswell College, and a Masters of Philosophy from Green College, Oxford University. In the span of 12 years, he pastored a Southern Baptist megachurch in Dallas, Texas. He is a young and hip Baptist church at Chesapeake, Virginia, and a Pentecostal church in Charlottesville, Virginia. His deconversion took place in 2010, but he remained a closet atheist for a year while in the church. Wes is currently psychosocial director at the hospice company covering Gilroy to Pacifica, where he leads a team of chaplains and social workers whose goal is to provide spiritual and emotional support to the dying and their families. He is with us tonight for this evening to speak on the metaphysics of an atheist chaplain. So please join me in welcoming Wes Fornes.
All right. Thank you very much for that introduction. And yes, it's good to be here. How's everyone doing tonight? Good. All right. Do you enjoy the chicken fried steak? I hear it's good here. All right. Maybe not. So it's good to be here. I want to thank the organization for inviting me. I ate lunch with Brian about a month ago, and we had a good little talk. And he's a good guy, and so he had asked me to come and kind of talk. And so I'm going to be coming from different perspectives tonight. And so I am an atheist, but I also am going to be talking a lot about spirituality in what I do. So I am on a mission, and my mission is to give atheists a voice in the midst of death. So I'm put in the middle of people's most difficult times in life. So I'm a hospice chaplain. That's what I do. I enter people's homes, and I go to nursing homes as well to assess spiritual and emotional needs of patients and their loved ones. And so if we compare life to a movie, I come in at the very end, right before the credits, okay? That's where I come in to the picture. When I cross the threshold into a dying person's room, my purpose is just to meet them where they're at in life. What I mean by this is that I'm ready to provide counseling, but I'm also ready to pray to any God, chant to any deity, and yes, pray the rosary over and over again, like I do so many times. And so as I said, I'm trained to assess the spiritual and emotional needs. So the key things that I'm looking for when I'm with patients is this: how are they coping? Are there any regrets or unfinished business in their life? And what are their thoughts on the afterlife? And how they're making sense of the dying process. And so I use these answers to the questions to identify the distresses, such as denial, maybe there's isolation, regrets, shame. And then I establish interventions, maybe counseling, prayer, provide education on the dying process. Maybe I'll do a life review. Now, ultimately, my goal is to help to support people who are dying and to help them process what's going on so they can make coherence out of what's going on. Now, on rare occasions, a family will ask me, Wes, what faith are you? Right? So this is where I kind of get a little nervous because I don't want to say, well, I'm an atheist, right? Because normally I'll probably get kicked out of the house. So what I usually say is I'm an interfaith chaplain, that I am a chaplain who works with patients and families of all different faiths and backgrounds. And so that way I'm honest, yet I'm not using the A word. Now, outside of my work, the questions I get most often is this: how can you be an atheist and a chaplain? In other words, what can you contribute to the dying process? I mean, I have no God, I don't believe in an afterlife, I simply live in a random and hopeless universe devoid of meaning, all because there is no God. So how do I make sense out of that? Well, what's even stranger is that it's especially the past year, it's been more of the atheists asking me, how can you be an atheist and a chaplain? Which I kind of find interesting. So how many of you watch the Olympics? All right, and you know in gymnastics how they have the balance beam, right? So it's this little instrument that the guys and gals do flips and everything on. Well, tonight I'm going to be on that balance beam, all right? So I'm dealing with just a couple of inches because I'll be talking about an atheistic worldview, but I'm also going to be coming really, really close to that spiritual worldview that crosses the line. And I think it's important that you understand that I'm talking to you tonight as an atheist chaplain. All right, so this is who I deal with every single day, is people who are dying. And so my purpose and my goal is just to help them make sense out of it. So a little bit of history about me. It was already covered, but I did pastor at 3 churches, grew up Catholic, went to Dallas Baptist University, fell in love with the Bible. I mean, I was just on fire. Pastored at 3 different churches, Dallas, Chesapeake, and Charlottesville. All the way from a small church in Dallas, it was Southern Baptist, very conservative, all the way up to a very Pentecostal, Holy Spirit-driven church in Charlottesville, Virginia. It wasn't really until I was uprooted from America and went over to the UK for about 3 years to study philosophy, where I was like, oh my gosh, what have I been thinking all this time? And so, but interestingly enough, I came back and I was a closet atheist for a while. And the reason being is that while I was at my church in Charlottesville, I saw so much good in the small groups that I was leading. So many lives changed for the better. These people weren't the type of people that were protesting outside abortion clinics or Planned Parenthood. These were, really average people, I guess. Their views were out there, but they weren't militant in what they believed. And I just saw a lot of good that was going on. Finally, one day I was up preaching a sermon, about 800 people out there, and I got to the very end, and I realized, Wes, you're done. This is it. And so the very next day, I resigned. And so ever since then, I've been a chaplain. I am in love with spirituality and philosophy and meaning, existentialism. That was the next step for me, and I have loved it ever since. So I did my training at University of Virginia, and then at Sharp Hospital in San Diego before coming up here to San Jose. And so a couple of things just about my worldview, because I am going to be saying some things tonight, and you're going to be like, man, I bet you he likes Deepak Chopra. All right? Okay, I promise you, I'm just going to put it out there. I'm not a fan of Deepak, okay? So please, if I say anything that you think has come from his mouth, you can throw me out. It's all right. So I am a humanist. So my outlook and my system of thought attaches a prime importance to humans rather than the divine or supernatural. And so as I progress morally, I hope to someday include not just human importance, but all sentient beings. Until then, I will continue to eat meat. I'm also a monist. I believe that the process of explaining the mind is best understood through the neural activity of the brain, and that's it. I believe that there is just one substance in my head. It's my brain. So no soul, no spirit. And all of this spills over into an ontological thesis of physicalism, that everything is physical, that there is nothing over and above the physical, no spirit world. And so all of this is what guides me as an atheist chaplain. And when we get down to the very bottom of it, how people make meaning and coherency from their life is what fascinates me most. Whether they're Baptist, Wiccan, or Hindu, how they find value and purpose in life is what I want to explore. So I get to enter into their lives of people at the very end of their journey. I get to ask the deep questions and explore their most personal feelings. Of course, not a week goes by where somebody says, you must come home all the time depressed and sad. I'm sure some of you are thinking like that, that so many times the family members will come over and they'll say to me, Wes, how do you take care of yourself? You must be sad all the time. Interesting thing is that I'm not sad. My job does not bring me down. I do have hobbies that keep me active, but it doesn't bring me down because I consider it a privilege and an honor when I cross a threshold into patients' rooms to enter into one of the most sacred places that you can enter. I mean, what's going on for the patients that I face on a daily basis are points of reference in their life and the family's life that they're never going to forget. I mean, it's a crisis situation for a lot of families. And so for me, I consider it an honor. It's a very sacred space that I'm entering into. But let me take this one step further. And this might sound weird for you to hear, but my most favorite moments, and I'm being honest right now, and again, I'm an atheist. My most favorite moments are with those families where we're gathered around the bed and we're praying. Not just praying, but specifically for some reason, I've noticed that within me, it's the Catholic prayers. I just did one today, and it's very moving for me. And I feel the spiritual aspect of it. Now, I know that the feelings that I'm feeling are the neurons in my brain. I do have a physical, natural explanation of it. But it is still a very powerful moment that's the most meaningful to me. It's those times where in the human experience it's raw, it's most desperate. It's those experiences that cannot be put under a microscope and studied scientifically. It's those experiences that bring the scientific-minded from the ivory tower and down to the subjective question, what in the world is going on? And what does it mean for my 51-year-old mom to get pancreatic cancer when she's been healthy her entire life? So when I hear religious people talk about the supernatural, spirit world, heaven, hell, my response is not to launch into an attack where I'm channeling Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins. In fact, I see a lot of futility and insecurity in being an anti-theist. However, I see the opportunity to increase our capacity for compassion and empathy when we try to understand how people's lives are impacted in believing in the supernatural. So the human question is, what does it mean? How does it impact your life? What does it do in your relationships that you're in? So whether you're an astrophysicist or a priest, whether you're Lawrence Krauss or Pope Francis, I want to hear how your experience brings awe and wonder within your worldview. So let me go into actually making some points. And so the first one is this. And we will have question and answer. It's my favorite part. I have like 3 points. All of them are like softballs that I'm throwing up to you so you can have your way with me during question and answer. It's going to be an exciting time. I'm going to try to keep my talk below 30 minutes so that we can have plenty of time to do whatever you want to me for Q&A. All right? So, spirituality. An atheist can be spiritual. Let me define spirituality in more of a holistic way that I hope you can relate to. Spirituality is an endeavor. It's the intentional action of experiencing transcendence and the sacred. And when I say transcendence, let's be careful. I mean the kind of transcendence that I feel when I'm standing at the precipice of the Grand Canyon, or when you witness the birth of a child, or when you unite as a group to take on a worthy cause. And once we're engaged in a spiritual experience, meaning and purpose is illuminated. So spirituality is both a feeling of deep connectedness to yourself and to others. A spiritual life is a meaningful life. And so yes, that deep connectedness, there is some dopamine going on in your brain, some oxytocin. So we get that, and I get that. But whether you're witnessing a majestic sunset or you're speaking tongues in a Pentecostal church, what's important is how the experience impacts your life for the good. Now you might say, Wes, instead of spiritual, I'll just use the word meaningful. So that's fine. I just think it's advantageous for atheists to adopt that type of language as a way of showing religious people that atheists can have meaning and experience transcendence without the notion of a God. Keep in mind, a large part of America still equates atheism as morally repugnant as a rapist. So, at least for me, I gladly use the term with religious folks because it gives me an opportunity to leverage my own ontology of ethics. So let's stay on the topic of spirituality just for a bit. Next is spiritual well-being, and here's one that I'm ready to take it from you guys, all right? Spiritual well-being is more meaningful than a strict scientific perspective. Not too long ago, I was with a 45-year-old man dying of cancer, dedicated his entire life to engineering. He worked with robots, and type A personality, very driven, and never really wanted to talk about spirituality. Ardent atheist, and we would always just kind of talk a little bit about his job, his career, what it did for him. And as his cancer progressed to where he had already began to stop eating and drinking. And usually when they stop eating and drinking, there's about, give or take 2 weeks before they die. He asked me to come a little bit closer. So I come closer to his bed. And he said, Wes, I know I've talked to you a lot about my career. My career defined me. But there's something that nobody knows about me. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, well, I have been writing poetry for the past 30 years. None of my family knows it. I said, oh, wow. What kind of poetry? And so we kind of explored that. He talked about how poetry for him was this spiritual experience for him. He was able to kind of put aside the scientific method of his own career and his job that took up about 50 hours a week of his life. And he was able to talk about poetry. The very next day, I came back and I said, you haven't shared this with your family. What about writing a poem? I can help you with it. So the next hour and a half, he wrote his final poem for his family. And so it was a very moving thing for him to share with his family. All this time they thought, this is our science dad. This is our rational dad. And here he is talking about these metaphors of life, illuminating life. It was a side that his family had really not seen ever for him. And of course, about 4 days later, he breathed his last breath. And so when we're talking about a meaningful life, your spiritual well-being will prove more valuable, I think, than a strict scientific worldview. Why? Because a head full of concepts will help you sound intelligent, but a mind that is filled with the voracious pursuit for meaning and fulfillment produces more flourishing. Scientific concepts and a high IQ provides next to nothing when your life has been flipped upside down because of tragedy or because you've lost your job. Rather, it's how you've cultivated your mind and perspective in life, meaning, values, and purpose that helps one persevere through those times. But allow me to clarify myself. I'm not stating that a knowledge of concepts is bad. I'm just saying that those concepts should have some type of meaningful purpose in your life, other than, for instance, simply constructing irrefutable arguments. After all, when we read Einstein, and he talks about the awe and the wonder of the universe that he experienced, he even uses the phrase, and I quote, cosmic religious feeling. You see the spirituality coming through. Now, I know Christians try to hijack Einstein as one of their own, and he's not one of their own. But this cosmic religious feeling was a net gain for Einstein's well-being. I know some of you are very familiar with Sam Harris, and in his book, Moral Landscapes, he discusses the importance of well-being, of conscious creatures, which he thinks is the only thing that we can reasonably value. He goes on to say that the concept of well-being is like the concept of physical health. It resists precise definition, yet it's indispensable. For Harris, well-being is associated with whatever minimizes unnecessary pain and maximizes flourishing among individuals. And I agree, but I think we can go a little bit deeper than just minimizing pain and maximizing flourishing. So much like well-being, my concern is with spiritual well-being. And so spiritual well-being involves this: the cultivation of coping skills in dealing with suffering, the development of a reasonable framework to understand crisis, the ability to really self-reflect and look within yourself. Spiritual well-being involves being grounded in the construction of meaning-making techniques in order to persevere and cope appropriately with conflict. And so all of this beckons Socrates his adage of know thyself, tapping into those subjective experiences and feelings. That's where we find meaning and value in the universe. My next point is this: brace yourselves. Good delusions are often more beneficial. Ouch. So here's the next facet to the metaphysics of an atheist chaplain. Good delusions are beneficial. Now, I define a delusion as an idiosyncratic belief or impression that is firmly maintained despite being contradicted by what is generally accepted by reality or even rational argument. I was at the bedside of a lady about a year ago, and her husband was a lead scientist for a major pharmaceutical company. Again, atheist, didn't really want to talk about anything spiritual. He even said, "I'm not spiritual." I said, "Okay." We developed this relationship, and as time went on, we never really talked about anything. He never was very self-reflective, never went in deep to how he was feeling emotionally about everything. And I happened to be there when his wife passed away, when she breathed her last breath. And so it was, I was at the end of the bed. He was by her, and a couple of children on the other side. And all of a sudden, about a couple of minutes after she breathed her last breath, he got on his knees and he said the Lord's Prayer. Okay? Never did we have any type of spiritual talk. Didn't want to go there. And he began to pray. And so I just made note of it. He didn't ask me to pray, didn't ask me to say anything. I was just there. A couple of weeks later, he came in for counseling. So I also do bereavement counseling. After the loved one has passed, they'll come in for counseling. And we were talking, and he began to cry. And I said, why are you crying? And he said that the place where they buried her was along a hill, and it was newly bought lot. They expanded, and his wife's grave was the only one there on this hill. And he said, she's all alone. And so I said, again, he graduated from MIT. I'm not expecting someone who's graduated from MIT to talk like this. So I'm just trying to take in information. And then he began to cry some more. And he said, tomorrow night they said it's going to rain. It's going to rain on her. And I'm afraid I'm not going to be there. So it's interesting what happens when we're in the midst of a crisis. This was a shock to me. And here's what I want you to remember. And I'll repeat this twice because I think it's important. That we tend to search for meaning whenever other situations, or when situations violate our expectations, or when they don't adhere to basic social norms. I want to repeat that. We tend to search for meaning whenever situations violate our expectations or when they don't adhere to basic social norms. So when we think of delusional people, we normally think of like schizophrenics, right? Mentally ill people. Or maybe a pastor. I don't know. But at some point, we all have our own delusions. Think of the delusional coworker in your office who thinks that they're the smartest and the best person at your company, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Maybe that delusional egomaniac is you Maybe you think you're the smartest and the best. But now think of the person who conjures up a heaven despite the lack of any objective evidence, or the person who wholeheartedly believes that their deceased father is always looking down on them from heaven, despite any empirical evidence. And to encompass maybe some of us in this room, think of when you look at your cat or your dog, and you begin to impose what you think is going on in their minds. I do this with my cat. I'll say, he looks so lost. That's what I always say to my fiance. I'll say, look at Gucci. He looks so lost. How in the heck do I know what's going on in that cat's brain? I have no idea what's going on. But we do this all the time at the most basic levels with animals. We do this with other humans. It's called a theory of mind, which I'm sure we'll get to with the Q&A. Delusions can be viewed as explanations of experiences. So why have delusions been accepted rather than more realistic explanations? Now, when I hear patients give an account of something that sounds delusional, really what I want to do is I want to find out, what does it mean to them? How does it impact their lives? And so delusions are explanations of experience. Two main psychological reasons are usually cited to explain why individuals adopt delusional explanations. First, the delusions are consistent with previous experiences. And so I get a lot of this with patients and family members with a Pentecostal background, let's say. Pentecostals are very into speaking in tongues, signs from the Holy Spirit, miracles, and all those types of things. And you begin to hear them explain what they're experiencing, their delusions, we might say, using demons, angels, and that's very common because that's consistent with their belief, it's consistent with their worldview, it's consistent with their experiences. Second, there are biases in reasoning processes leading to acceptance of erroneous conclusions. It's not uncommon for me to be with family members who want to forego chemotherapy and use some holistic type of pseudoscience. And with this, their response is usually, God is bigger than science. And so usually that has negative consequences at the end, but for them, there's biases in reasoning. And also, people that have these types of experiences or delusions, we might say, they simply don't have alternative explanations at hand. If you think of near-death experiences and what we're finding out about the brain, my dad had a near-death experience when he was 19 years old. My dad does not know anything about the brain. All right, he doesn't know that the parietal lobe and how it functions with the sensory information. He has no idea. So when he talks about a near-death experiences, he's going to talk about it as if this is what really happened. And so these are some of the reasons that even extends to a concept and a belief in an afterlife. It's not just wishful thinking that we want it to happen. But for a lot of people, if it comes down to Aunt Betty is up in heaven playing bridge for eternity, or Aunt Betty is rotting away in the soil, is going to be fertilizer, they're going to choose the former, right? And so it does bring comfort. It does bring consolation. Here's where the atheists will want to stop me and say, but Wes, what about delusions that prompt someone to strap a bomb to their chest for an ideology? I hope that we can agree that there's a difference between Aunt Betty being up in heaven playing bridge and the difference between somebody strapping a bomb to their chest for an ideology. There's a difference between my scientist friend who conjured up an afterlife right there in front of me. And the difference between somebody saying that the Bible is an infallible text and using it to suppress homosexuals, women, and minorities. And so when you think about it, we do have studies and scientists have run tests, and we've heard it all before about studies going into hospitals and conducting research on the effects of having some type of hope, some type of spirituality, and what it does for their lives. And of course, I've heard it from my Christian friends use that to say that Christianity cures people in hospitals. But really what the scientific data has shown is that this idea of hope, people that have hope, in fact, do have a better quality of life and respond better to treatment for the illness, no matter what faith background that it is. It really comes down to having hope. So my point is that some delusions do bring hope and even cause personal flourishing without inflicting harm on others. Positive delusions are important because they bring a sense of coherence. Well, when death is knocking on the door, grasping for any sense of coherency is the ultimate quest. And so I want to close with something that happened today at around 11:30 a.m. this morning. So I went to a house of this family, and this family is always calling me to come and talk to the matriarch of the family. She has pulmonary fibrosis, difficulty breathing in her chest. Time is really limited for her. And something interesting happened. And as soon as she said it, I said, doggone it, in about 6 hours, I'm going to be in front of the atheist organization, and I'm going to probably tell them the story. Because she looked into my eyes, and she said this. She said, Wes, I know I'm about to die. What's going to happen next? Now, I walked into the house an atheist. I walked into her room an atheist. So here's this lady, sweet as can be. Little history on her is she's devout Catholic, very devout Catholic. She thinks I'm Catholic. I don't argue, whatever. And so she looks at me and she poses this question, what's going to happen next? And so this is what I said. I said that, your transition is going to be peaceful. It's going to be really peaceful. And you don't have anything to worry about. She said, what about purgatory? I said, I don't think you're going to purgatory. I don't think you're going to go to purgatory. I said, Revelation chapter 21, verse 4 says that God has prepared a place for those where there's no more sorrow, no more pain, no more crying, for the former things have passed away. I said, that's where you're going. It's going to be peaceful. You're surrounded by family who loves you. It's going to be peaceful. And so I left her, and then I got a text message from the nurse on my way up here today. She passed away. And so it's difficult dealing with that, knowing that she passed away. But on the other side is an atheist chaplain. My own personal metaphysics focuses on the meaning. What does it mean to you? How does it impact you? And so when you come to talks like this, and you're with your friends, and you're talking about these deep things, these concepts, I want to encourage you just to open yourself up. Open yourself up to the awe and wonder. And I'm not saying the atheists don't do that. But as an atheist, I tend to struggle to open myself up to the numinous. I kind of close myself off because I have a physical explanation. But not being afraid of the word spiritual and embracing that voracious pursuit for meaning and understanding, that awe and wonder, can often help us to understand human relationships. It can increase our ability to show compassion and empathy. And so I hope that stretches you a little bit tonight and we'll go with some Q&A. How about that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wes. I'm absolutely certain that nothing you said raises any flags with anyone in this audience. So, are there any hands?
Hi, my name's Fred. I have a spouse who is, I'd say, liberal Christian. And we've made kind of a bargain or a deal that if I pass first, I get a humanist service. And if she passes first, she gets a Christian service. But I'm starting to wonder if we shouldn't have reversed this idea so that if I pass first, she gets a Christian service, and if she passes first, I get a humanist service for her. Do you have a recommendation on that?
I've done Christian services, I've done humanist services, and really the question is, what do you want to happen before you pass? What does your wife want to happen before she passed for the service to celebrate your life or her life? And really that's what matters, that it's a time to celebrate the life of the person that has just passed. So, yeah.
Hi. Early in your talk, I believe you said something along the lines of you fell in love with the Bible. My question is, have you actually read the thing? No, actually, that's a joke. Here's my real question. I think I was on a PBS show about a very fundamentalist religious family who was uncomfortable with their college-age children studying science because they were afraid that the science was going to take them away and prevent them from getting into heaven. Have you ever experienced somebody like that, and what would you say to them in that case?
So my undergrad was at Dallas Baptist University, and that's a very fundamentalist Christian university. As far as curfews, girls couldn't be in my dorm room except on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the door had to be open, and you could get kicked out if there was a can of beer found in your refrigerator. And that was a hot topic back then with what to teach in the biology classes. And I think what I didn't touch upon is the fact that, we can talk about good delusions and delusions that manifest themselves as beliefs. And then there's intransigent beliefs. And that's the difference. And so my scientist friend, even though he constructed an afterlife and kind of saw his wife as being rained on and all alone, if you asked him now, he hasn't, this elaborate concept of heaven, hasn't turned into an intransigent belief. It's a belief for him that how he's making sense of this situation. On the flip side, you have people who develop these intransigent beliefs, these absolutist beliefs, and there it's difficult. And I was right in the middle of it for 5 years at Dallas Baptist University. And it's really difficult when someone is that absolutist, that militant, because when you advance the proposition that it comes from a deity that is omniscient, omnibenevolent, all-loving, and it comes from that angle, steering them in either direction is going to be difficult. And so, they're going to view it as they don't want their babies to be tainted by any type of cosmology that says differently. And that's the difficult part. And I've seen a lot of families broken up. For me, fortunately, my mom, who is Catholic, she was like, "Oh, you want to be an atheist? Are you happy?" I said, "Yes." She goes, "Okay, go be an atheist. It's fine." But for other friends of mine, it was much different. So it's difficult when you're dealing with intransigent beliefs.
You gave a couple examples of atheists who at the last minute broke out some spirituality that surprised you. In your ministering, have you dealt with atheists who didn't do that and just accepted, the inevitability of our corporeal existence, shall we say? And what was your interaction with them?
So I deal a lot with that, even currently, even recently. And I think I'm still navigating how I feel about it. The only thing that I can say with all honesty is that when I ask my assessment questions, and I ask questions like, how are you coping? What is this like for you? I ask open-ended questions. It kind of puts it out there that they can kind of open up. And it's not that they're miserable, but it's just that there's not a lot of talk about what brings fulfillment in their lives. A lot of times it's their families, which brings fulfillment, whereas the religious people, like even today, when I asked her, I said, well, what brings you fulfillment? The first things that she said is my faith and my family. She actually spent more time talking about her faith. When I'm with atheists, they usually talk about their family, is bringing fulfillment, joy, and comfort in their lives. But it's usually just kind of, I'm gonna die, I'm gone, lights out, man. And that's usually how it goes. One patient is a neuroscientist that I have, and it kind of breaks my heart because he just doesn't really open up into any type of self-reflection with his family, with anybody. And he's like, I'm going to die. My prefrontal cortex will cease to exist, and I'm dead. And so okay, all right. And so there's not a whole lot of there. But not to say that, again, I want to be careful with what I'm saying. I'm not saying that atheists, it's hopeless. It's just there's not a lot of, magical talk. I don't know.
So you'd mentioned that you were you counsel a lot of people who are believers. Obviously, that was a big part of this talk. And you said that you kind of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you play along and pretend, if you will, to share their faith. And I'm wondering, has it ever happened where you were outed, like within the last few hours or something, just before somebody died, and you had some splaining to do, or anything like that? I'm just curious how that went, if that ever did happen.
Well, see, I'm an atheist, so I don't have morals, and so I just lie. I mean, what does it matter? No, I don't know. I play along. I'm an interfaith chaplain, and sometimes on very rare occasions they'll say, "No, what church do you go to?" Oh, and then there is that point to where I'm like, I don't go to church. You have to. I respect the question, but to kind of help all of you understand, when I am trained to make sure that when they're asking questions, to make sure it's known, it's not about me. It's not about my worldview. It's not about my belief system. And so I'm really, really good at steering the conversation back to them. I'm here to help you out. I'm an interfaith chaplain. I don't go to church. Or sometimes what I say, with this family, in fact, they're devout Catholics. The lady who passed away just a couple of hours ago. I do remember them saying, "What church do you go to?" And what I say is, I say I grew up Catholic. And that's the truth. My mom's Catholic. I grew up Catholic. I haven't really been outed. I will say when an atheist finds out that I'm an atheist, they light up. They are like so excited, usually, because they feel like I'm there to convert them, and they don't want to talk to me. And then when I say, hey, I'm just like you, I'm an atheist too, they're like, oh, great, sit down. And so that's great. But I really there hasn't really been a situation where it was tense or I felt cornered, like I was like, oh my gosh, the jig is up. So, yeah, that really hasn't happened. Yeah. Oh, Joel, here it comes.
Two questions, Wes.
Of course.
First, thank you very much for coming tonight.
Yes.
The first one is, can you tell us a little bit about any experiences you've had with the Clergy Project? And the second question I have ties into the last question. For example, let's say you're dealing with a woman who's dying, and she's a devout Christian, and you have to play along, and you have to pretend that you believe what she believes. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that internally when you know you're lying to yourself? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Joel is so subtle. Gosh. Lying to myself. And see, the suit that I don when I sit down with the patient is one of just empathy. It's all about empathy. I'm going to walk where they're walking. So there is not this visceral internal tension of, oh my gosh, please don't ask me to pray, or I can't believe I just said that. So that's not anywhere in my scope of imagination. And so I'm simply going where they're already at. And again, my job is to meet them where they're at. And so if they say, oh, Wes, where do you think I'm going, or what happens next? And I already know she's Catholic. I already know that what she thinks about the Bible. I'm going to go there. And the reason why it feels so great, and I will say authentic, okay, I'm going to use that word, is because the main goal is just trying to walk in her shoes, trying to have that empathic connection because she's dying. And I see the beauty in her worldview. I really do. I know what it says about the Amalekites in Deuteronomy. I know the genocide. I get it. And I know all the terrible texts. But we're talking about a person whose faith, as it foments to the surface, is showing the beauty of what's going on. And so for me, it's a beautiful, beautiful moment to be able to have the privilege to say the Lord's Prayer, and have the privilege to pray to the Virgin Mary, even though she's not a virgin. So yeah, it's a privilege.
Yeah, I'm not really familiar with end-of-life pastor work. Are there more than one hospice organization in like Santa Clara County?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
yeah.
Do you work with all of those? Are there more than one? Or is it just
No,
you? Or
I work with the best one, but there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them, and in fact, to be honest, there's a lot of them in this area, and we cover, as Lynn said in my intro, is from Gilroy to Morgan Hill, and and so and they just passed a law, the Death with Dignity Act, which I'm so glad. And we are on board to educate families and to walk them through that process, and I'm happy about it. But yeah, to answer your question, there's a lot of hospices in this area, especially. Yeah.
Are you the only one for that agency?
No. I'm one of. I just hired a new chaplain, so we've got 4 chaplains. And 4 social workers. I'm not on the field as much. I have a small patient load because I'm now more of in a director-like position where I'm providing education and training. I just hired a Lutheran, so yeah, it's good. We got a Lutheran, a Baptist, and I think another Baptist. And so, and we all work really well together. They respect me and whatever. It's going well.
I've got a couple questions and sort of an association. My first question to you would be to expand a little bit on what you were talking about at the beginning of your speech regarding anti-theists. And you mentioned that there was some hostility and some insecurity. Thank you. And could you expand on that a little bit? And my other question was, I have some real close friends, and once in a while we sit around after have dinner, have some wine, maybe sit around a fire, and we just share some really fantastic things. And we walk out of that meeting or that evening feeling like, wow, these are great friends. And when I lost my father, a good number of family members were in the room. And that was my first experience with sort of the things that you are dealing with. And so he passed away with a number of family members holding his hands or touching his shoulders. And for many people in that room, I was brought up in a very religious family, I'm sure that that was a very spiritual moment. I don't identify that as spiritual. I do identify it as a fantastic, emotional, human experience. So my question there is, how does that relate to your use of the word spiritual? Okay. And then my last association is, well, my last thing is that lying to someone with Alzheimer's, just going along with the story that they say, is actually something that's recommended. Mm-hmm. And I see, it might be difficult at times, but in the end,
yeah,
sort of the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
So anti-theists and then his story.
Yes. Yes, I made one sentence in my talk about anti-theism where I said there's some insecurity and something else. I forget. What is it? Fear? Did I really say fear? Oh. Oh, yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Did I say fear? Yeah, so let's go with that. Yeah, I would say fear. Futility, yes, thank you. So when you're an anti-theist, as I was for a temporary amount of time, I simply don't know what's to gain. I don't know what the purpose is. When a person is an anti-theist, I don't know how they're at a disadvantage when it comes to having a dialogue and having a dialogue that increases understanding and the similarities of the human experience. And so when I read and I hear Richard Dawkins, for instance, the man has a scowl on his face like all the time. I would love, just for once, for him to talk about at length his family or something that he loves. But when you're polarizing, and I think that's what anti-theism, what it fosters is what concerns me, is it fosters this sort of pride of I know, and the other side is childish, believing in magic. It fosters just a lot of contempt between the two sides. And I don't see what good it does. And so that's what I'm talking about. But for the anti-theists to humble themselves and talk about more of the human experience, these shared values of awe and wonder, and what that means, and how both can experience it. Once you're able to break that, then you're able to talk about how both sides find purpose, meaning, understand values in their life. But until then, I mean, it's like you can watch YouTube or watch any Hitchens debate, any Dawkins debate, and Krauss. And it does very little to bridge any gap in the dialogue and in the understanding between the two sides. And so that's my concern. And then having been an anti-theist for a time, I didn't see any value, any good it did in my life, especially with my relationships with Christian friends. If anything, it did more to hurt and to cause more hostile emotions and negative. And so that was my reason for saying it. And I still stand by it, and I would defend it till the end. That's what I feel and believe with anti-theism wholeheartedly. I think it's completely futile to be an anti-theist. Absolutely. But to be an atheist or to say I don't believe in God until evidence comes forth, but you can still engage in a dialogue of understanding. And that's where, kind of going into your next question about spirituality. In the experience that you are talking about, I think what we're seeing is the difficulty with words. Spirituality, you can put 10 Christians in a room and ask them to define spirituality, and you'll come up with 10 different answers. And so that is sort of the problem with the word, that you can kind of make it be whatever you want it to be. I gave you my personal definition. I'm sure that there are Christians that would disagree with my definition. And so it's a very broad word. And really, for your experience, I don't want to impose what I think your experience was. I don't want to be disrespectful to it. It sounds like it was a spiritual experience. Really, my question to you is, what did it mean to you? And if you don't want to use the word spiritual, you want to use the word, it was very meaningful, let's go with that. And so I want to be careful about imposing words. The point that I was making is that I think it would be advantageous for the atheist community to embrace that word and accept it, because I think it would do a lot more in furthering the conversation and the dialogue between atheism and religion. So, and that's all. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got Keith, then Don, then Larry, then Veronica, then Mark, then Carl. So can I ask that you ask one question and keep it concise, please?
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Wes. That was a great talk. Gives us a good insight on what you do. Really appreciate it. My question is quite simple, which is, earlier you said you fell in love with the Bible, and that really sort of stuck in there. And I'm thinking, I mean, I never had that experience. So, what was your conversion like? I mean, what were the big signposts that turned you around? I'm just curious.
Jean-Paul Sartre, Friedrich Nietzsche, a close friend of mine, her aunt died, and she was a humanist. She's more moral than I was or ever could hope to be. And the thought of her going to hell forever made no sense to me, despite what the Bible said. And so, when I went away overseas and studied the French existentialists and studied Nietzsche, and understanding meaning and value and purposes, and studying ethics was a big part of what I did. I think being away, and again, you have to realize that I was in the environment that I was in I was perfectly primed. All the components were there to shape Wes into this, militant absolutist Christian. Everything was there. And so yeah, my passion for philosophy, where I kind of got away, began to kind of to think, and so yeah, I would say that and the personal experiences of my friend's aunt, being on hospice and going through that, it just didn't make much sense. And then as the more I got into philosophy, I've always been into debate as well, through high school and college. Just the arguments, after a while I was like, oh my gosh, like this really is just faith, and I really don't have anything that's any critical answers to add to the discussion, and it's just faith. And so that's kind of what happened. Yeah.
Thank you for coming. I wondered if you had experiences with the family members within the family having strong conflicting religious views.
Yeah. Yeah, the one that comes to mind is I was not in hospice, but I was at a hospital, and a 17-year-old and a 19-year-old siblings, two sisters, they died in a car wreck. So I was in the emergency room. I showed up around 3 o'clock in the morning and was with the family, the parents, when they found out the news. It was there for a couple of weeks after, during that process. They were Methodist, and so that created a lot of, if God is all-loving, if God is good, why did he let this happen type of thing. And so in your question, when you bring up conflicts of faith, that's kind of the one that comes up to my mind. In any type of crisis with faith questions, whether it's that situation that I was in, or even when people go on hospice. We had a person who was 21 on hospice, which is ridiculous to me, how that could happen, and sad. You encounter those types of tensions with your faith. And a lot of that is just open-ended questions to help them explore and to make sense. And so I want to find out, who is God to them? So if you come from a Methodist background and you've just lost your two daughters, my questions are going to center and circle around the fact of, well, who is God to you? And what are his attributes or her attributes? And what to you is God's idea of justice? And so the more that you ask those types of questions that dig deep into, okay, it's not just you're a Christian, but like how deep does your theology go? The goal is to help them to make sense out of what's going on, that their God, although he's real to them and is a just God and is an all-loving God, did this for a reason. And a lot of times in the questions, they'll provide the reason in due time. And sometimes they don't. And sometimes they just, at the end, years later when I check in, they're shrugging their shoulders and say, I don't know why this happened. I still don't know why. And it's still a crisis. Unfortunately, to say God works in mysterious ways, it breaks my heart to hear the family kind of resort to that. But a lot of times that's the base answer is, well, God works in mysterious ways. I don't know why it happened. But again, that answer does not satisfy. I wish I could kind of go into a little bit more of another way to look at it, but I want to make sure that I respect their worldview and I don't impose mine. So yeah.
How do you handle it when someone asks you directly to pray with or for them when they're in the room? That is, they're not sending you home and saying, pray for me when you're gone home, but they want you to pray for them right then and there. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think in my talk I discuss how I want to make sure I understand your question correctly. I pray, and so whether it's a Buddhist chant, and please stop me if I'm not answering your question. Is that what you're just?
I guess I'm saying, how do you do that if you don't believe in what you're praying to? You're making a show
Yeah.
for them,
No.
but that doesn't bother you?
No, not at all, because it's not a show. I'm not acting. It's no different than, I mean, you kind of have to think about if you're at the bedside of someone that you love dearly and they start asking you questions. Are you really going to start quoting from a Hitchens book or the God Delusion and saying, listen, Grandma, I know this is what you believe, but you're not going to do that. And if you don't do that, I wouldn't say that you're acting or that you're playing. It's more of you're realizing that it's not about you. And so when I'm at the bedside, it's not about me. So, and it's not an act. I'm not playing a part. For me, even today when I prayed a Catholic prayer about 7 hours ago, it was very moving, very powerful, very sacred in my life. Now, do I believe in what I did as far as it impacting my life in supernatural ways? Not at all. But that's not the point. And I think with your question, that it misses the point. Because the point is, what does it mean for the patient? What does it mean for the person at the bed? It's not about me. And so that's the best way that I can answer your question. Otherwise, I excuse myself and, I don't know, leave the room, or I start reading a passage from David Hume. I don't know if I want to stay true to myself, but it's not about me. And so, yeah.
I'm just curious on how you navigate your experience with the family and friends as the patient gets closer to passing on.
Can you be a little bit more specific?
Well, I'm presuming that your primary work is to help the patient prepare for the end.
Right.
But I'm sure that in the course of that, things come up that may shock the family or friends, or they just may be so emotionally involved, and they come to you.
Right.
I'm not sure how, how
I
do
follow
you
you.
handle that?
Yeah. And so a lot of times I'm my assessment questions are for the family as well, that are same for the patients. How are you coping? How do you understand what's going on? What does this mean to you? How are you feeling? How are you taking care of yourself? Sometimes there's family dynamics that are, you have a sister that didn't want the patient to go on hospice, and she's mad at the family. Next Monday, I'm meeting with a family because their loved one just stopped eating and drinking. And so I'm going to do a counseling session with the family where I'm going to walk them through the dying process, what to expect, what it looks like, and also how to handle the next upcoming months as you prepare for a service, how grief works and how the waves of grief will hit you, and how to adapt and cope with that. And so you're absolutely right is that it's not just with the patient. Because the family, their world has been turned upside down as well. And so they as well need the support and guidance too. So that's sort of how I navigate those situations.
Okay, last two questions. Mark is silent. Oh my goodness. Okay. No, you gave it up. No.
Hi, my name is Carl. A couple of things about, I tend to be left of center on politics, and I notice it's easier to get along with my conservative friends when we're nice to them, as opposed to being angry and combative with them. And I see good delusions are often more beneficial, and the same thing goes with religious people who believe the opposite. If you can let them enjoy their life or pick on them all the time. And so I think some of these things are very well stated because they are beneficial to people who believe strongly, and I don't think we ought to kick them in the butt for it.
Yeah, yeah. And that, I think this is the key word, often, because they're not always beneficial, but there was a study done at Northwestern where they talked about, I think it was McAdams, cognitive behavioral psychologists did a study talking about these good delusions. And the study ended with the fact that, he concluded that people who develop good delusions, and specifically people who, when something outside happens and they attach a meaning to it, God did it for X, Y, and Z, that they are a lot more sympathetic and have an increased capacity for empathy and helping others. Now on the flip side, because there is a flip side, is that the study revealed that what it does is it fosters what's called cognitive fixedness. And that's when you say God always works for the good of those who are in Christ Jesus. Always. Then your 15 and 17-year-old daughters die in a car wreck. And yeah. And so, but the study did talk a lot about, the good delusions, how they often help us out. But I think one of the things I take away from it is that we all, even atheists, and it goes back to the theory of the mind. And the theory of the mind is that our ability, when I say the sentence, follow me here. When I say the sentence, Jacob thinks that Eileen doesn't know that I stole the jewelry, right? Jacob thinks that Eileen doesn't know that I stole the jewelry. You're able to think through that. You can process that. Animals can't. And so we have that theory of the mind. And so that's why we're able to, it's so easy for us to infuse a soul, infuse a spirit, infuse an afterlife. That when the chimes on the front porch chime, as soon as I think of my Aunt Betty, it's going to be that proclivity. It's going to be so easy. Everything is just right for me to say, that's Aunt Betty just saying hello, to go there. And I think that's one of the things that, as a human nature, going back to the cognitive sciences, is our brain pushes us in that direction so easily. And so, some are beneficial and sometimes it's not. There's two sides to it. So, yeah.
All right, well, let's thank Wes one last time.
Thank you.